Welcome to Big Conversations, Joel. It's a pleasure. I think I want us to just sort of get back to that last bit of the conversation we're having. You come to Uganda 15 years ago to design new malaria drugs, right?
Mm.
Yeah, first, yeah.
So I was living in Canada at the time. I had moved there in '02, and I designed these drugs using artificial intelligence software. And people don't know this, but have you ever heard of the Human Genome Project, where all of human DNA was analyzed? Well, that was my company.
CRISPR. Oh, wow.
And the chief engineer was Muganda from Masaka, Edward Chiriluta.
Okay. Wait, which company? Is it a Ugandan company?
No, it was my company, and that company was based in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
So Chiriluta was the chief engineer for the company called Double Twist, and we were the first to assemble and annotate the human genome. And so several companies later, when I'm up in Canada and I designed these new drugs, I said, "Hey Ed, do you have any connections with your home country?" And he says, "Yeah, actually, I could get you into the Ministry of Health. One of my old friends, his sister, works as for the Minister of Health." So I came in '07, the day of the Mabira forest riot. It's welcome to Uganda, Joel. But by later the year, we had Chogo. So it's I think that was like a pivotal year. Mm-hmm. It was like the end of an era and the beginning of a new era.
Yeah, I see.
I could feel it.
I see. Yeah, first also describe to me how AI, for example, how you use that to design a malaria drug.
We used the data that already existed in the public domain in the scientific literature. So if you have access to any online library, anybody could have done it. What I did was I looked at every chemical that had been tried and whether they failed or worked.
I see.
And then we fed that into neural networks, which is a category of artificial intelligence. Yeah. And from that, we ended up, what we fed into it were equations that calculate things about.
I'm actually a software engineer, so I'm very, very familiar with neural networks.
Oh, okay, excellent. This is great.
I just wanted to understand. So you're saying basically what you're training the machine to do is read academic papers that are published?
No, I had humans do that. The humans read the papers. We did the searches and gave them a pile of 100 articles, and then they read through them and did manual data entry of the chemical structures.
I see.
And then once we had the chemical structures and the clinical results, whether on mice or rats or humans or whoever, then the software ended up finding out what properties of chemicals correlated. So we found out of the thousands of equations you could apply to a chemical molecule, 22 of them were predictive. And so we used those 22 equations as nodes in our neural network. And then we kept on using more and more chemical informatics software to, in effect, mutate chemicals and make them into different shapes and whatnot, and to see if they could get better theoretical results. And then I had a laboratory in Russia make them for me, and they mailed them back to me in Canada, and we tested in the lab in petri dishes, and out of the 88 molecules we tested, 25 wiped out Nagana overnight at low dosage. And then we did another test on malaria and another test on black fever, leishmaniasis. So we found, basically it took us only 4 months of screwing around, reading through literature and doing some data entry.
I see. And is this the approach now that pharma is taking? Is it mostly...
They've been cowardly, partly because it takes too long to find out if you've made a mistake or not, usually. That's why I chose these diseases, because they're, very quickly you can find out if you can kill malaria in a petri dish. Versus, are you going to heal somebody from dementia or cancer or heart problems? That could take years to find out if your drug really works.
And in terms of cost, is this cheaper than the traditional way of producing?
Much cheaper, much faster. It was basically a few of us guys screwing around with software and the data from the public database. And obviously we had we had a strategy to try to analyze these things. And I just used other laboratories, right? I would just send molecules to other labs to test. So I didn't have to invest in buying machinery or hiring people. I just leveraged all the labs that existed that were helpful in Canada to do the initial testing. I used that lab in Russia to make the chemicals. And so basically it was a virtual company. And I ended up trying to, I held a WHO symposium in Abuja, Nigeria in 2008, because I wanted to teach as many African scientists as I could that they could discover drugs on their own and they didn't need fancy laboratories.
I see. Isn't this, like when you say, when the cost of manufacturing pharma stuff becomes cheap, for me, the thing that comes to my head is that this could easily be weaponized, right? If if you can basically use a computer to predict.
Oh, we're in a new era. I think COVID is the alarm bell, and it is completely impossible now to differentiate between something that's man-made or something that has occurred naturally. I used to be able to see right away, because my mentor at Stanford won the Nobel Prize for discovering how to copy and cut and paste sections of DNA. And there's telltale signatures in the DNA from those methods. The new methods leave no trace. So, and now it's easy. Any 12-year-old could order a kit from Amazon and engineer something in his kitchen. So we're in a whole new ball game here. And it's impossible to differentiate also between biowarfare or biodefense. Because to do biodefense, just like in any defense, you simulate your enemy. So you want to imagine what's the worst your enemy could do and to prepare for it. So now if somebody lets that out of the lab, accidentally or intentionally, how can you prove either? So it's a tricky time. I call it biofire. And I've been warning everybody about this because I knew I was setting this loose with every breakthrough I made in robotics for DNA synthesis and DNA sequencing. I made the first PCR machine in 1987.
Oh, wow.
And so I've been seeing this danger coming for a long time. It's also very exciting. We may be able to cure many diseases because of all this. But the downside is that there's a risk of arson from biofire.
PCR, you mean the machine that does the tests, right?
Well, the current machinery is called a thermocycler. In the old days, we had to sit there with 3 different temperatures of water baths. And we would move test tubes from bath to bath to bath for different lengths of time. A minute here, 45 seconds there. Anyways, you felt like a monkey just moving tubes and I was like, this is silly. Anybody, let me build a robot for this. And so I set up water baths and I made a real simple robot, but it was the first time anybody had made one to try to automate it, just because sitting around for 3 or 4 hours moving tubes from water to water, you feel like an idiot.
And how does, so I don't know if you're familiar with the actual process of testing, how does that moving around test tubes in water baths, how does that
work? So PCR, polymerase chain reaction, it's based on denaturing. DNA has double helix, right? So there's 2 ladders that connect together. So one temperature separates the ladder. Another temperature allows a primer, a small piece of DNA, to attach to each end. And then another temperature allows it to zip it up and make a copy. So it's really a way of copying a little subset of DNA, like finding a sentence in a book with the first few words, and then making copies of that sentence over and over again. So the temperature changes are all designed to separate, allow the primer to attach, allow it to zip up, and then repeat over and over and over.
I see. And how much money do you make of inventing something like this? I mean, if you're willing to tell me.
No, I didn't make any money. I was just a lab tech, and I just wanted to get my work done.
Oh, wow.
I just wanted to be more efficient as a worker.
I see.
And I think actually that's how most inventions actually happen.
This is not patented at all. You don't get any
No, well, I mean the machine they use now is not like mine, right? The thermocycler, they have a different mechanism for.
Oh, I see.
They change the temperature inside the box, and versus I just lived with 3 separate water baths. So, no, I've invented many things that I don't get. I mean, I invented first version of Battleship, the video game. I made that when I was 13.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay, let's first dig a little bit deeper. Let's start from the beginning. At 13, what are you educated to do, for example? This seems interesting. I just want to sort of put everything together, At 13, where are you? Are you in school? Are you...
Well, I was in school, yeah.
Studying what? Yeah.
Well, I was in whatever, secondary, right?
Yeah.
Just started,
I see.
13 years old, so I must have been 9th grade.
And how do you get familiar with computing enough?
Well, I had actually learned to program computers much younger than that. I was 8 when I made my first software. My mom was visiting the superintendent of the school district, and so I snuck into the back room where they had the big mainframe computers, and I asked them how it worked, and so they explained to me how memory registers worked, and then somehow it felt right to me. I understood it. And then I realized they didn't have a system to track attendance. So I was like, well, why don't I make a software to track attendance? And so I learned to do, that was back in the days when software really was software. It was a pile of punch cards with holes in it. Yeah. So that's how you would program. You would punch holes in these cards and feed the pile of cards into a machine. So I did that when I was 8. And funny enough, that system lasted until I graduated secondary school.
Oh, wow.
But I understood the principles of computing
I see.
just from observing, but no special training, not at all. I went to a public school, not to a private school. I'm curious. I learn things quickly.
I see. And okay, so this guy who can code, right? What do you do? What do you choose to do when you get to university, or do you get to university at all?
Well, okay, so I ended up getting to go to university very early because I accidentally took a test. I didn't know what it was. It turned out it's called the PSAT test. And I had never thought about going to uni, even though my parents are educated, mom and dad both. But they had never put pressure on me about uni. And so I took this test. A teacher said, "Oh, you of all the students should take this test." I was like, okay. It seemed like a stupid, easy test. I finished it in half an hour. They had set aside 3 hours for it, so I wanted to go do other things. I had a lot of other hobbies and interests. Anyway, so 2 months later, there's an announcement on the loudspeaker, "Joel, please report to the principal's office." And he flings at me this piece of paper. He says, "You brought shame on our school. Look at this. You're the absolute worst student in all of America." And I'm like, "Really?" Well, I didn't really care about the test. It seemed pretty easy to me. And he said, "No, I'm just joking. I actually got the highest score in America." And so I ended up getting to go to Harvard at 15. And I studied chemistry there. And then as part of the deal, my dad made me also commute over to the U.S. Naval Academy because they were recruiting me for their science and engineering program. Right? So the Pentagon always wants the smartest kids they can
find.
I
see. Wait, so you're American military as well?
Well, I don't have any, I didn't serve, so I mean, I didn't.
Oh, you can work at the...
Well, I was a kid, right? So I was 15.
They can't enlist you at that time. Yeah, I see.
They were grooming me.
I see. Also, let me try to understand. Citizenship. You mentioned Canada. Are you a Canadian?
Yeah.
You're American as well?
Yes.
And you're Israeli as well?
I haven't yet claimed my citizenship there, but one day I will.
Okay, but you're Jewish. That means you're
Jewish,
entitled to...
Yeah, and my family is respected, both sides.
I see.
Like the first hospital in Israel bears our name. It's Bellenson Hospital.
Oh, wow.
And it's the first and largest hospital in Israel.
I see. Why not go and claim your citizenship in Israel?
I don't know. As my cousin says, I'm Plan C. If Israel gets destroyed and the Jews get kicked out of America, then maybe they'll have to move to Africa. So
they'll find you here.
They'll find me here.
So one of the things again, as I mentioned, I watched some of the videos you put up. One of the things that fascinated me about you is the language thing. There's a local radio presenter. There's a guy called Detach. I don't know if you've heard of him. He became famous recently by speaking patois, the Jamaican, speaking English with the Jamaican dialect. So perfect.
You can't believe.
Yeah. But the thing that's very impressive about him, and I don't think he's actually himself aware of it, is he's quick to learn languages, right? So he was, one of the interviews he did was mentioning how many languages he spoke, most of them local Ugandan languages. And it's impressive how quick he masters. He spent, I think, about 6 months in Jamaica, and he speaks so fluently.
That's great.
And that's the thing I noticed also about, okay, maybe not
I'm not
fluently,
fluent,
maybe not
perfect,
fluently, but how is this, because you also mentioned you speak a couple of other international languages as well, right?
Yeah, I know a lot of international languages.
Is there skill to learning?
I think music helps.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think music really sets your brain to detect patterns of rhythm, of melody, and just, I don't know, I think music is a really valuable skill to give any child for many things, but I think language comes from it.
And at what point do you start learning
I started music when I was 5. I started on accordion, right? And then I moved on to piano, and I studied music theory and started writing songs when I was a teenager. I had a rock and roll band in high school, playing what's called progressive rock, and we would mix that with reggae and R&B.
And is it? Have you done anything pro? There's this guy. I forget his name, but he was one of the producers of that Dark Knight trilogy. He's a VC in Silicon Valley as well. Okay, the name doesn't come to me, but he's also a bass guitarist. He's part of the band that plays for Rolling Stones.
Oh, that's
cool. Yeah, so that's I found that extremely impressive.
My mother blocked me because it turned out I have a cousin who owned a major record studio in Los Angeles. He recorded Elton John and Donna Summers and many of the 1970s stars, and I really wanted to get my music out there. My mom said, look, you have too many other skills. That's a sleazy world. Yeah, your cousin Randy, he does it, but I think you have better possibilities than to do this with your life.
That's a sad one.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's not a disaster. I mean, who says you have to become a music star?
I see.
You can still enjoy playing music and play for your friends. And I've played here. I recorded with Michael Uma at Steve Jean's studio. Michael Mugisha and I've been friends with Isaac Rucci for 15 years.
Yeah, is there something that we've listened?
We didn't release it.
What? All right.
I talked to Michael recently. We're gonna think of another project, and maybe we will release this one.
I see.
But I wasn't confident. I had just come here, and I didn't want to make a big.
Yeah,
I didn't want
it makes
to be
sense.
showing
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to get attention usually.
So that makes sense. Let's talk again about the languages, right? So you speak some Luo, right? Actually, was it actually?
Yeah, I mean, Kopango, Kope.
Just the greetings, basically.
Echo, Acho, Foyo, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I probably know 200 words of Luo.
I see.
And the different variations, Jap and Alur and Lango and Acholi, they're close, but they're different. Same with the Bantu, right? They're close, but they're different.
I see.
And that's actually the same in Europe, by the way. Between Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, they're close but different.
Oh, I see. There's a joke I read on, I think, Twitter. If you go to Europe and you find an Englishman and tell him you speak French, they say, no, I don't speak French. But if you come to like Africa and you ask me, like I'm a Muganda, Bantu, and you ask me, do you speak, say, Lusoga? I would say, I don't speak it, but I can hear. Like basically, it's, how I understood the joke is, the guy is saying in Europe the languages are far apart, that if you don't speak it, it's sort of like alien to you totally. But in Africa, I may not be able to speak it, but I'll get the context because its languages are so similar.
Well, English is a different case. Because I will say between the Latin languages, the Latin family, which includes Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and probably you could say to some extent French, all is within the Latin languages. So they're close. They are close, and people who speak Spanish can understand a fair amount of Italian or Portuguese. I can. I speak Spanish fairly well. I grew up near the Mexican border. So the town I grew up in was probably 30% Mexican Americans. although their families have been in America probably a century or two before mine, but they're more American than I am. But so like the English language is a mutt, right? They combine stuff from the Scandinavians, the Germans, the French. It's a mix of a whole bunch of languages. It's really a pidgin. It was a pidgin language, and they don't want to call it that. Yeah. But the English language is a pidgin language.
Oh, I see. Well, the other thing that also piqued my attention from some of the content you published is your advice for like COVID. Basically, I think you used the phrase
Uganda lifestyle disease.
Yeah, so that's one. But also you said Uganda, we are working in medicine, something like that.
Yes, it was walking in medicine.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying, right? And this is okay. So from also what I've listened to internationally, it seems people who are saying, COVID is more of a lifestyle disease. What you're saying, even if the data is clear, basically, even if the data is clear, people were saying that you're probably safer. You shouldn't be worried if you're, physically fit and things like that. Most of that sort of insinuates that you're discouraging people from getting vaccinated,
Oh, well, that's the thing. I think this vaccine versus ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine debate ended up derailing what should have been the real discussion, that the American lifestyle of overeating and sitting on our asses watching CNN and getting scared is really what's killing us. And so the people who are militantly for vaccines, they were angry. I'm not opposed to vaccines whatsoever. Yeah. I don't think they're the greatest thing in the world, but they also work to some extent. They help it. They help prevent you from having serious illness. They oversold, right? They oversold what the vaccines would do.
Agree. Yeah.
And I think that caused the backlash. In addition, trying to force people to do something always makes people resent and not trust. Yeah. And what I say to everybody is, look, when you're afraid of something, the opposite of fear is not control. The opposite of fear is love.
That's a good point. So this is what this got me to realize, right? Every country is authoritarian. Yeah. Most countries have just not been.
Some they can decode it with democracy. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that exactly, because I used to, when chaos happened in America, I used to be a big fan of Trump because I don't like America very much. So I used to be a big fan of Trump. But I used to be a big fan of American politics. No, not the country. I don't. The country is dope. It's the politics.
Don't worry.
Right. Yeah.
Don't worry.
So I used to be a big fan of Trump, but at that time, Canada was so admirable, right? To me, it looked like.
Now Canada's become more crazy than America.
Yeah, exactly. And
which I never thought was possible.
And it looks the countries that we look up to right now, for example, in Scandinavia, like Sweden, they also just one extreme trigger where maybe COVID is not going to be that thing, but in the future something is going to come where it's going to probably push them to express their authoritarian.
They may.
Yeah.
Well, culture matters too, I mean, because obviously there's a conspiratorial perspective that thinks is all being driven by power-mad bureaucrats or greedy pharmaceutical companies. All that's true. But I think what the real force pushing it is the average person. It's actually quite depressing when I see how scared the average person is in these countries. And I think in this case, they've been pushing their leaders to be more authoritarian.
So that's also the thing I don't believe as well, right? And the good thing, so one thing maybe we forgot to introduce you, you're the captain at Wakanda Analytica. Such a cool title. But the thing that
we got that from Nelson Mandela's favorite poem, Invictus.
Tell me about
that. It ends, I'm the captain of my soul.
Oh, wow. So the thing that I've noticed on the internet is, and this happens in Uganda as well, right? If, for example, a political leader here tweets, right, there's a swarm of praises that follow, right? In real life, if you talk to 1,000 Ugandans, you'll not find 10% that will say those good things, right? So the question is, these people online
who push these things,
are they real? And for me, I get the
who are
feeling,
they?
or who are they,
Who
right?
are they?
Look at, for example, there's a controversy right now with Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan brings these guys, the scientists
Elon,
So the mainstream, what used to be the mainstream is not the mainstream anymore, right? CNN comes out to attack Joe Rogan, for example, right? But the numbers of viewers are clear, right? If you look at the number, okay, Spotify doesn't publish numbers sort of transparently anymore, but if you looked at, say, YouTube numbers, right, Joe Rogan would get an episode that had 11 million views within a month, right? CNN doesn't get that.
No.
Yeah, exactly. But there's that impression you get online that a lot more people are believing, a lot more Americans are believing CNN over Joe Rogan. Yeah, and for me, that sort of, if you look at just the numbers alone, there's sort of like a big difference that I don't understand. And my assumption is, of course, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, they do a lot in pushing the conversation one way. But again, I feel like even with that,
we're in the
there's
midst,
an
we're in the
exaggeration.
midst of an earthquake, right? A media earthquake. The fact that you and I are doing this is proof of this earthquake. This earthquake is that all the costs and ease of use of all the tools for making media has become so much so that ordinary people like us can make media, right? And so I had, used to be involved in American politics briefly. I ran Gary Hart's campaign for president back in 1984 and took him from 8th place to 2nd place in the state of Iowa. And then they wanted me to run New Hampshire. And I didn't like how he changed his policies in the middle of the campaign, and I decided I was cynical and wanted to stay away from politics from then on.
I see.
But I understand how it works. So I have predicted the winner of every single American presidential election from 1980 through 2016, and we could argue about 2020 as well, about who really won. But for 10, excluding 2020, I had 10 in a row, which I got dead on. How? A simple thesis I had, which was that the media creates public opinion. And so what I would do was I would watch all the major media, I would look at all the main newspapers, and I would kind of give them a grade. Say, all right, this one seems to be 60-40 for Democrats versus Republicans, or 80-20, or whatever. And I would figure, all right, what's their viewership or readership? And then I would just make a simple spreadsheet, and I'd figure, all right, well, it seems like you sum up the preferences of whoever's running these media companies. This seems like who the powerful people really want to have win. So,
Exactly.
and that's how I would figure out who would win. And everybody was always shocked that when I predicted Trump would win in 2016, my friends were completely stunned. And I haven't voted. I never vote. That helps me to keep emotionally detached. And so I can try to be more objective when I look at it, even though I do have my preferences. And who didn't cry when Obama got elected? I mean, you'd have to have a heart of stone to not be crying that some amazing, important historical event had occurred. But we also knew that it was very likely to be disappointing for everybody. But we still felt that he had to be voted for, at least everybody I knew.
I see. Yeah. So last night, I was listening to Twitter Spaces. I don't know if there's a German American. It's really hard to tell people's nationalities nowadays. But the guy is called Joschka Bach. Joschka Bach. I think it's a sort of German version of Joshua. So he's an AI guy, yeah. But there's also that. So he's one of the sort of the artificial intelligence people that I've followed for a while. So I think he has a book he wrote in 2009 about principles of. It's sort of like a basic. It's like the Principia for artificial intelligence, sort of, for like big data and how, So. The reason I'm bringing him up is even if he doesn't like say it out, he's one of the people who are bringing a lot of spiritualityism, right? So they're making it spiritual. The whole artificial intelligence thing is coming up. He's making up what like spirit now, technically defining what's like spirit.
There's a book about that actually. Ray Kurzweil, the guy who invented the synthesizer, the piano synthesizer. He has a book called The Age of Spiritual Machines. It came out in like 2000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is something, when you do AI and it discovers something that the human eye couldn't, there is that sense that some sort of essential truth of the universe emerges from it.
I see. So that's basically what the guy was saying. I thought was like originally him, but...
Oh, no. I think anybody who's been doing this for a long time has seen it.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. In the end, AI, machine learning, it's still just software.
Yeah,
right? And it's still garbage in, garbage out.
True. Yeah.
So the whole point is with ML or machine learning is if you feed it enough data, can the variables get altered? And the variables in your equations are being trained by real data. So that's the interesting, as opposed to you setting a value for a variable, the variable is discovered. That's the only difference, really.
So this conversation was slightly deeper, right? Okay, so one thing, by the way, the reason I brought it up was he made the defense that even if right now it feels like the world is under a lot of control, that it's actually under less. It's just that we are seeing it more, right? It's more transparent, right? So he says when TV, exactly what you've said, when people were consuming mainstream from TV and they don't communicate with each other, if the guy at CNN said the vaccines work, you don't have a Joe Rogan to, the vaccines work, okay, but you don't have you don't have an alternative voice to sort of induce that skepticism. Yeah, exactly. So right now, CNN is trying to do the same thing, except it's just sort of using backward technology because now we have, Joe Rogan and that other guy, Brett Weinstein.
And everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You're doing it, I'm doing it, my YouTube channel, yours, we're all getting heard, maybe small audiences, but at least relative to CNN or Joe Rogan. For now, who knows, maybe one of us will be the next Joe Rogan, but even if we're not. We find our tribe. True. Right? We put this out there to find our tribes. Yeah. That's really what we're doing. I generally believe that the reality of life is different things change at different speeds. Mm-hmm. So biology, evolution happens over a very, very long time, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, right? So we have a brain that's based on biological technology that's hundreds of thousands or millions of years old, depending upon what layer of the brain we're talking about. Culture takes a long time to truly change. It can superficially change. People change their clothing, their music, but like how they really see the world, that could take 1,000 years for a society to really change how they look at things. And then politics. Well, politics could change every decade. Or 2 or 4 or whatever it is, but it's a lot faster than culture. And then of course then there's technology. And technology is changing by the quarter, if not quicker. So generally I see that these rapid changes of technology cause dislocation for everything else. So the technology kind of bursts all the limitations, political, cultural, military, spiritual, intellectual, and it even challenges our brain, right? Now we're getting so distracted by social media platforms. It's challenging for our 2 million year old brain to figure out how to function in this world. And we're getting faked. Right? And the technology for faking is getting so good.
Exactly.
And so how do you know who to trust, what to trust? Can you believe your own eyes?
Exactly. I'm not even sure if you're here right now.
I'm not even sure I'm here. Maybe I'm not. Some people think the whole universe is a holograph. Or holograph. That's the interesting thing. This technology, I was part of it with DNA. Right? I chopped off 2 of the zeros of the cost of DNA analysis. When we first started on the human genome, it was going to cost $100 trillion to do one human being. That was in 1985. And so by the time we got to 2000, I had chopped off 2 of the 6 zeros. And it came down to $1 billion per human. And now it's down to a few $100s per human to do a full human sequence. And the same thing's happening with everything. Solar power, batteries, hydrogen fuel cells, making hydrogen itself, high voltage direct current, superconductivity. All these technologies are on the edge of just completely pulling the rug out from underneath so many of us, and it's exciting and it's alarming at the same time. You hope that you're going to come out on top.
Yeah.
But
So that's a good question. If you're tasked to sort of make a prediction on where this convergence is going to be, right? So AI is splitting off, but also the tech within biology is also splitting off. Also the actual robotics, I think I've read a paper on nanorobotics as well. There's a lot of that as well that is sort of
just the sense the world is out of control.
Yeah, exactly. Where do you think this stuff at what point do you think this stuff converges? Do we
in war?
Oh, okay. That's a good.
I think war is what ends up consolidating technologies and accelerating their development and integration for good or bad, right? I mean, Napoleon's army is the one that set up roads and hospitals and libraries and museums across Europe.
Yeah.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built our hydroelectric dams and bridges and roads, and you see it here in Uganda. The UPDF is building amazing stuff everywhere, and they actually had some of the most practical approaches towards COVID, setting up tents out on football pitches to be ICUs. So militaries, life and death really concentrates the mind.
I see.
And the survival of a nation forces you to figure out what you're going to use and how to make it work.
I see.
So war has its purpose. It's awful. It's painful. People die. But it tends to be how technologies make a big leap.
And how do you anticipate the nature of what is going to be probably the next big war, right? I read, it's a very popular book, Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature. I don't know if you've read it. So he argues that violence is going down, and he has his pseudo statistics. He shows numbers that...
I think his time window is very short. I think societies have 80-year cycles.
Yeah, but some of the arguments there are solid. The book also, he's a very good writer, so his work is very, very interesting to read. But so if you're
going to argue that World War II didn't have a lot of death.
So okay, if anyway, I don't know. Like some of the numbers. So he claims obviously he's using a bunch of students to dig up the numbers for him. So I didn't argue with the numbers he published, but still, even with those numbers, it's not consistent.
You have to look at a lengthier piece of history.
I agree with that.
Just the post-World War II, the Pax Americana, which is ending, right? So all hell's about to break loose because, Americans, especially it seems like the working class and small business people, the ones who voted for Trump, they don't want to be the policemen of the world. They already were in Afghanistan and Iraq. A lot of them got injured or killed, and not that many compared to other wars, but they just feel like, why are we doing this? What's the point? We don't need the oil. We have enough of our own. Why are we trying to even force our culture and everything on everybody else? Why don't we just get our own act together in our own country?
Yeah.
So as America retreats, there's going to be a lot of vacuums of power in the world. And old rivalries, more local, will become more important as the global policeman retires.
Oh, I see. So you okay? If I understand you right,
we're watching already Egypt and Turkey fighting it out all around us, right? Egypt, in Lebanon, Libya, Yemen, Ethiopia, Somalia. It's all Egypt versus Turkey.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And they don't report it that way in the press.
Yeah, I also didn't actually comprehend it that way.
But if you look at who's supplying weapons to who and intelligence and everything else, if you look at Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Ethiopia, the recent war between the Amhara and the Tigray, it's all Egypt versus Turkey right now. There are other players.
I understand what you mean. But
that's part of it. That's an ancient rivalry. Ancient. Right? The Roman Empire. Right? The Roman Empire, the eastern side of the Roman Empire was in what we now call Turkey today. And Egypt was an empire.
That's the story of Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
Yeah. So this stuff is old. This is
I see. Okay, so if I understand you right? So let me first make this point actually, right? One of the guys I enjoy reading, but I don't think I understand what he writes very well, is Nassim Taleb, I think. Yeah. So
Black Swan.
So I've actually, I think, read the whole Incerto thing. But the argument with, the fat tails, right? And from how I understand it, I don't know if that's the right way to understand it.
Well, it's also kind of like a more dour view of the butterfly effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but he claims, okay, so one of the arguments would be that the reason why it is sort of war at the scale of World War II is probably not expected is the potential of such a war, right? Because if you look at, say, we have nuclear weapons right now, and I don't know if they work by either way. There's also, it could be a PR stunt, right? But if they actually really work, right, it could be existential, right? So if America, Russia, and China chose to go at it, it could be the end of it all,
Well, I think that, it'll be ugly.
Yeah.
It'll be very ugly. It won't be the end of humanity. We're too tenacious for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought the whole
let's
idea.
look at even the fact that we're here.
Yeah.
The fact that we have the freedom to have this discussion and have it be heard wherever this is being watched or heard, right? That came from their preparation for nuclear annihilation, right? The TCP/IP protocol was invented by the U.S. Pentagon, by DARPA, so that whatever little parts of America survived in the course of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union, those surviving nodes could discover each other and reform a network. So the foundation of our internet came from
I see.
preparation for annihilation. And that's actually where solar panels came from.
I see.
So,
and I'm going to take you back to this guy, Joska Batch, right? So one of the conversations he was having was, he thinks inevitably we are going to build an AI that is aware of its agency, right? So the whole argument of, AI destroying every world is creating a paper cutter that destroys the whole world, trying to find paper to cut, right? Which maybe is not the right.
There have been many dystopian.
Yeah, exactly.
For instance, Isaac Asimov wrote I, Robot. You remember that with Will Smith?
Yeah.
Right. That's that came from Isaac Asimov's book, and the whole Foundation series is addressing this question of AI and whatnot. Now, in the end, there's going to be many AIs.
We
already have many.
True.
Google's an AI, Amazon's an AI, Netflix, all these are using AI. And in the end, they're not all united, right?
I agree.
And in the end, humans are going to use these AIs against the AI tools of other humans. So it's a weapon.
So I see. Yeah. So this is actually very similar to what he's saying also, right? And he says, what's the word? Conscience. I'm going to use self-awareness, right? So if you build a complex system that is so complex that it's aware of its agency, right? Like, say the human, right?
Well, the problem isn't you and I know ML, machine language, AI, basically only learns history.
Yeah.
Right? So some recent, I forgot where they did it, and they ended up doing some AI thing, and it just came out totally racist. Because all the data that they trained it with was, from history filled with racism.
Yeah.
So.
Here's the thing, though, right? So if you say, let's look at the planning. The planning is a little bit, simple and very opaque. It's harder to see what's going on, but it's much, much simpler, right? But the idea is this model, same at the machine, right? Looks at this kind of data, but it's supposed to build some sense of a model, right?
Yeah.
Some prediction of where it wants to go, right? So with supervised learning, you show it, say, faces of cats. You show it, these are the right faces of cats. These are not. And then you show it a bunch of data and it will tell you, oh, that's a cat, even data it hasn't seen before, right? But it has a model of what it's looking for, right?
Conformity.
Yeah. But the idea is, for example, for the human, right? I build a model of who I want to be tomorrow, right? Say I sit here, we're having this conversation, but say, it may not be like very vivid, right? But I know probably I want to get a promotion at work, right? That's me building a model of who I want to be at a certain point in the future, right?
We all do that.
Yeah, exactly. And then try to use the environment, basically, analyze the environment like an AI to bring that version of me to exist at that time, right? And what this guy was saying, Josk Bash, was, at some point we're going to build machines that do that, machines that are aware of their own agency, that know at a certain time in the future, this is a state in which I want to be in. I don't know how to get there, but I have to manipulate the environment around me to be in that state, right? And they will be so complex enough to do that. And what is claiming that at that point, there is no argument of whether the sentient being, sentient is the word I was looking for, of whether, such a machine is a sentient being or not.
Well, I think in the end, you can't have disembodied intelligence.
Okay.
So if we live just in the world of computer algorithms, that's not dealing with physical reality. Any intelligent system is going to have to physically exist. It's going to have to get energy, number one. It's going to need maintenance because, as we know, even electronics wear out. It's going to have to be able to sense its environment. That's where we're heading to with the self-driving vehicles.
Yeah, exactly. Right? That was the example I was going to give.
So that's already becoming aware of its environment to some extent in certain ways. And more and more sensors are coming for everything. Obviously, I digitize smell, and I'm in the midst of digitizing flavor right now. So all of that is going to be added on to it. So will these AIs be, their physical manifestation is not just going to be in a box, in a computer box or laptop sitting there. It's going to be, somehow it has to exist in the physical world.
I see.
And its necessities for physical existence are going to drive it. Right? So it will want energy. Right? Because
that obviously brings limitations as well.
It's the core one, right? It has to eat.
I see.
Everything has to eat.
I see. A question, right? Let's detour a little bit. You said something I think is interesting. Sensors, right? So because we are doing video here, and I sort of do software engineering as a job, I know images, right? So I know like how Adobe can tell a video, how even more complex software can say, look at faces. So I know how, like I can...
Defining outlines, paradigms.
So I know most of that, right? But now I'm wondering, sound wouldn't be very hard as well. I mean, I imagine, I don't know, I haven't worked a lot about sound, but I'm sure that's something I will figure out. But when it comes to test, right, you're saying you're building sensors to define flavor, right?
Actually, I'm not so much building the sensors, but I'm building the data integration models and the neural networks and semantic networks that then use those sensors. And whether the sensors are detecting chemical levels, and of course we're training with human sensory panels. So they rate
so that's
something,
the question
and then because of that, we can discover the correlations of the chemical composition with how humans perceive it.
Oh, I see. Because, the question I was going to ask is, a dog probably doesn't have the same vision as I have, but it will use its sense of vision to make the right decisions about, say, obstacles, the same I would, right? So it's easier to build a Tesla because that sort of visual censoring, the purpose of it with the movement is usually the same, right?
But each animal has limitations, right? A bird smashes into your window, I bet, right? So
true. I see.
We all have our limits.
I see. So my question though, that's a good point. My question though was, when it comes to test, right? Test is, even among humans, it's very, very subjective, right?
It's very cultural.
What's that?
It's local and cultural.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very subjective. It's very localized. It's a culture thing as well.
That's part of what we're building into our system. So we want to be able to profile a local taste palette, so that companies that have a product that may have succeeded in their home country, how do they modify
capitalism is back.
How do they morph it into something that local market will like? And so that's one of the many applications that we're doing. Another one will be ingredient substitution. Many people have things that they don't want to eat. For whatever reason. I'm not going to judge whatever.
I see.
Or some people are trying to save the world by not eating palm oil. So these big companies are feeling the pressure to change their recipes. to be able to accommodate all these different dietary preferences and restrictions. And so that's also where our system will help out.
I see. Yeah, and I was going to ask what would be the use case, but that is a clear one. That is
like
very,
here's
very
one.
clear.
We have a potential client and investor that wants to use the oils that algae makes instead of palm oil, because palm oil is
Not as
we
healthy.
do a lot of deforestation.
Oh, okay. I thought
So
the healthy.
people are chopping down trees to plant palm oil,
True.
and if they can instead get high proportions of oil from algae, which is funny. It's an offshoot of the effort to try to make biofuel, and instead it's going to make human food, but it'll substitute for palm oil, which is drives a lot of environmental destruction. So it's still ending up helping, but not in the way they thought.
Yeah. No, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Coca-Cola is going to give us a variety of health.
Well, already they try to make drinks that have different sugar substitutes, because there's sugar is killing us.
Yeah, I know, but they've not done a good job yet. So maybe
there's too much money being made giving us diabetes and obesity.
I see. So okay. So I was still trying to show you the vision of this guy. Well, I listened to this talk yesterday. That's why it's very fresh on my mind.
That's great. That's awesome. That you get to
That's why it's very fresh on my mind. And since you're very interested in AI as well, I thought it would be a good discussion. So his idea of sentience, right? He says is at a certain time, we are going to coexist with non-human, non-organic, sentient being. Sentient being. Okay, so right now most of the agencies human complemented, right? So if I want the one example he gave was if you look at, say, a country or a company, right? As this unit, if you look at it as sort of the unit, right? Say Uganda, it has its own goals. For example, it has its own enemies. It has its own friends, and to the country, I'm just say how you have a hat, right? It's very useful, but if you could replace it, you'd get another one. It's not who you are, right? So the country as well, the humans are not who the country is, right? And I think this is Mao's. I read that book about Mao, but okay. When I remember that, I'll reference it. But the point is, the country for him, he thinks is already a sentient. It's not, say, an AI. It's a sentient kind of entity.
The people are the sentience and the culture. And
his argument is the people are just the nodes, the cells within this sentient organ, right?
Sure, but his dismissing of the human aspect of how that country came to be, that country has a history, and the actions and decisions and choices of many hundreds of generations of people have created that country.
So wouldn't that be the same argument with human and genes? So, if you say the human is not sentient, it's a gene that's sentient because, again, that genes...
Oh, no, I don't think that a gene by itself is sentient. I know there is the book by Richard Dawkins of the Selfish Gene. And, we've had numerous arguments over that over the years. But the reality is certain things are irreducible. A human being is not reducible just to the genes, right? There's epigenetics. Your genes get modified by your life experience, not your DNA sequence itself. The nucleotides don't change their order, aside from mutations and things. But methylation, whether a gene is turned on or off and silenced permanently, or that happens from environmental activity, for you living your life. And could be your grandfather was traumatized in a war, and that left a mark on some of his genes. And that's in you now too. So they found out these traumas that cause epigenetic modification are passed on for many generations in our ovaries and testicles.
I see.
That's the reality. We bear history inside of our bodies. And so that's my criticism of a lot of these views, is they ignore history. and their windows for history are very short.
I see. My question though is, if you carry that exact argument, but look at the country as the best unit.
Best or irreducible?
Yeah, exactly.
Is Uganda irreducible? We know that's not true. Sometimes it is reducible.
So what do you mean by irreducible? If you mean taking a chunk of it away, it's the same thing as, taking your hand away doesn't reduce you in any way.
No, I didn't mean like, well, every country has divisions, right? Every country in the world, along whatever line, language, religion, race, you name it, caste. So there's all kinds of divisions within a country. And those different cultures, these different aspects, sometimes they work well together, sometimes they don't. And people right now, Uganda's in a very open-hearted spirit where everybody's trying to work together across all these divisions, which I'm very grateful I'm in Uganda during this type of period, which is it's more loving than what the time your parents probably went through. And the countries I'm from are going into that type of period of hatred, and that's part of why I left, because America's disintegrating, and I didn't want to be there for it.
I see.
Same thing with Canada now.
Yeah.
Right. So my general view of history is about every 70 or 80 years, history rhymes, and it's and frustrating. It was a horrible discovery for me. My mother always said, those who don't study their history are doomed to repeat it. And then I discovered, I studied all the history, so now I'm just doomed to watch it get repeated, regardless of the fact that I read about it. So I'm Jewish, right? So my father told me at a very young age, he's like, look, our family in Europe was loved by their neighbors and friends, and overnight, people turned against them. So you may think you're safe and everything here, but always have your bags packed. Be prepared to learn another language and move somewhere else and become part of that country. Because you'll have to do that to survive. Your grandfathers did that. And you'll probably have to also, because that's our history. We have 4,000 years of running. We're just constantly being chased.
I see.
So we survived though. We ended up doing really well.
True.
But you could argue it's a Darwinian evolution, that because we've had so many, recurring annihilations and exiles, and then we end up
only the strongest survive.
Yeah, so each of my grandfathers spoke 12 languages, so maybe that's why I am able to learn language too. I don't know. How much is genetic? How much is environmental? I don't know.
I see.
So.
Yeah. So the other thing, I think the part of the conversation I wanted us to talk about was you coming to Uganda, right? So 15 years.
I first came
ago.
Yes.
Yeah. Why?
Well, I came here to do the animal testing on those drugs I designed, and I decided I wanted to use AI to discover drugs.
Yeah.
I'm a sci-fi guy, right? So I'm a Star Trek fan, and I'm actually family connected to Star Trek. The original actor who played Spock, he's my second cousin, Leonard Nimoy. Yeah. So I have this family connection to the Star Trek universe.
I was very surprised why you be Star Trek over Star Wars, but.
And then you see my company is called Wakanda Analytica. I named that long before the movie.
Oh, really?
Long before the movie.
Where does the name come from?
From a comic book called The Black Panther.
Ah, I see.
That came out in the 1960s.
Yeah. I'd imagine.
And so my Hebrew school ethics teacher was Jack Kirby. So if you know the Marvel universe, it's Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby invented almost all the characters: Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, the Avengers, Black Panther, T'Challa. He invented all of it. And so he was my Hebrew teacher, my Hebrew school teacher. So I was 10 years old and I learned about Wakanda. I see. And he explained why he invented Wakanda. And so that was, for me, it was a profound thing.
Why did he invent Wakanda? What are the reasons he gave?
The reasons he gave, he said he wanted to give Africans and black people worldwide a sense of pride, and to feel that there was something holy, and there was a place that was holy in Africa that had some sort of resource. He invented this bogus idea of vibranium, which doesn't exist on the periodic table. But, and that was his whole point, vibranium, it's like vibrance, to be alive. Yeah. So there was some sort of living force that was in Africa that was almost holy. And so for me, it was inspiring too. It was like, wow, okay, maybe it's not there now, but maybe it could be helped to be
so
built.
That's when this movie came out, Wakanda, that's when I got to know the word. There was a big argument, I remember, around whether we consider it to be representative or patronizing, right? And so this is, if you look at it from the perspective of,
of Killmonger versus T'Challa. Yeah. No, I know that debate. I think they were trying to reflect the arguments among the Black Power groups in America, because there was the different perspectives of the Black Panther Party, and Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, and many other people had their own angles and differing definitions of who the enemy was. Was it based on race, or based on class, or based on ideology? And so I think that's what he was trying to bring alive, the movie maker, because the guy who made the movie was a Black American. And so he was giving his own flavor of interpretation, but it's all there in the comic book series. And then you notice even in the movie there's the CIA guy meddling in the affairs of another country, and then he flips against the U.S. to support the local people, and even then they barely trust him. But then so it's I think it captured some real tensions that really do exist. And,
I see.
So I mean, people want to have a movie that's just solely, easily definable. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Yeah. And I think America's in a mental space right now where they're willing to consider that there's good and bad in everyone, and that there's we should consider both arguments on just about everything. And I see. I think that a movie that actually triggers such a conversation it's important. It's super exactly important. I see. And then to have a character like T'Challa, who's so noble, so important, very important. I see. All right, so let's. You come to Uganda 15 years ago to do this, the drug tests. Yeah. On animals. On animals. Never people. Okay. And let's be clear, I tested the International Livestock Research Institute and at Makerere on mice and rats. One of the reasons why I came here was because the Canadians care more about mice and rats than human beings. How so? Well, I had an investor tell me he wouldn't invest in our company because we were going to do animal testing. He says, why don't you test it on yourself first? And I'm like, well, there's not too many people on the planet who design new drugs. I don't think I'm expendable, and I don't think anybody's really expendable. I'm a humanist. So maybe you can call me that. I'm a speciesist, and I rather kill rats and mice than people. And while we're trying to discover a drug, I think it's basic human morality. So I got kind of disgusted, to be honest. I got angry about this issue, and I was like, wait a second. People in these countries have their own family members dying. Let's see if they want to, if they're okay with doing testing on mice and rats to protect their human children. Yeah, I see. It's like, so that and then when I came here, it became harder and harder for me to find common ground in discussions in Canada and the U.S. It's just their view of the world is their own narrow view, just like people's view here is narrow. Yeah. And I had the privilege of being able to see many different lenses. Yeah, we have a saying in my tribe in Uganda. I'm going to test how much you listen. I'm not good. I'm not perfect. Atatambula. You're walking slowly, yeah. No, okay, let me just think. He who doesn't travel ends up marrying the neighbor. Okay. So the whole idea is when you move around, you open your mind up to, the world is more beautiful than my neighbor, right? A lot more things. or there's different types of beauty. Exactly. So I lived in Japan. I studied in Japan. Oh, wow. I studied comparative East Asian industrial economics in Tokyo. I wanted to understand, this is in the 1980s, this is when the Asian tigers were rising. And I wanted to understand their different development strategies, export orientation, import substitution, all these different approaches. I also studied Chinese communism to understand Mao Zedong's approach as well, which was rare for Americans to care about communism, but I got deep into studying it. I was that tiny bit of the academic elite they would allow to study the enemy. And I felt it was important to take it, see what was good in it, and see what the pros and cons are of everything.
I see. I'm also active, right? So here in Uganda, right? If you go to university, they reduce. It's sort of very narrow field of what you're supposed to study, right? I did software engineering at Makerere, and I think I did like one class in business, one class in communication. And then the rest of it was computer science, right? But it seems you did history. You did...
I did a double major. Well, first I did chemistry at Harvard, and then Stanford I did biology. And within biology, I did neurobiology, microbiology, and biochemistry and immunology. And then on the other side was international relations. So on there was history, political science, economics. I had professors like Condoleezza Rice. She became National Security Advisor to President Bush and Secretary of State. And my classmates, Susan Rice, she became Obama's NSA advisor, and I think she has some powerful role in the Biden administration. But she and I were in the same class together at Stanford. Michael McFaul was my dorm mate. We lived in the same dormitory, and he became Obama's ambassador to Russia. So they wanted me to do that stuff because the fact that I knew science and engineering and all these things, I was like ideal for all of that type of stuff. State Department or blah, blah, blah. Goldman Sachs recruited me and all that. But I was like, nah, I just feel like I'm going to make my bigger impact in the world through science and engineering.
I see.
As opposed to getting involved in geopolitics. But I follow it closely. I'm pretty good at figuring out what's happening and what's driving it, but I don't get involved in it typically. I'm enjoying watching, or not enjoying. I find it fascinating trying to figure out what's going on here on the continent and the different forces at work, external and internal. And I don't get involved, but I want to understand the environment I'm in all the time and what's changing.
And Wakanda Analytica, what exactly do you do?
I've done a lot of projects.
So it's not a company that does this specific thing. It's sort of depending on what project you get.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of tools in my toolkit. So I look at people come to me and they ask me maybe to do a feasibility study. Or maybe they want me to be a sounding board. Or maybe they, like I had a client, AIRD, which is the main implementing partner of the UNHCR. They asked me if I could help them diversify their revenue streams so they wouldn't depend on donors. So I ended up interviewing for many weeks their operations all across the continent, from Chad to all kinds of countries, and hearing all of their ideas, their people's thoughts of how they could change their business. And then I discovered they had assets they didn't realize. And I realized one of their overlooked assets was that they had almost 1,000 mechanics. And they hadn't thought of them as important. And then I also noticed that people communicated very honestly and clearly. And I go, that's a huge asset here. Clear, honest communication is...
So how do you make money from being honest? I thought, from what I've learned from the Ugandan government, the only way to make money is to be anything but honest.
Well, you can make money all kinds of ways. In this case, what I realized was they had an asset that somebody else needed. And they had deficiencies that somebody else had. And that somebody else was Toyota.
I see.
So I partnered them with Toyota and created a joint venture. to set up Toyota authorized service centers in secondary cities across Uganda and then across 10 more African countries. Because having mechanics are one of the, people get bamboozled by mechanics all the time.
Tell me about it.
And then they're often whether even with the best of intentions, they may have lousy parts on hand that are used or fake. Yeah. And so I was like, you know what? It became interesting to me. If I can, because I feel the trust deficit is one of our biggest problems here. So if we can inject a little bit of trust, little oases of trust across the continent where people can know if their car breaks down, they can actually get it fixed efficiently and correctly. That maybe that could help add a little bit of something important, and obviously it would save people money not having to tow their vehicles all the way to Kampala. And so if you could, have really high quality repairs being done anywhere in the country where you might break down, that adds a sense of security as well, and knowing that you can trust these people. So that was kind of why I got excited about it. So I created an entity called Formula 21 Pit Stop, and it stands for 21st Century Pit Stop, right? And of course, playing off of Formula One. And then the secondary slogan was "Across Africa's Amazing Race," because we are in the middle of a motor revolution. And just everybody's driving. The number of vehicles here is just exploding. And the roads are being built everywhere. And I can see even the UPDF is building roads in Congo. And I can easily imagine the day when Uganda can travel all the way to Nigeria by road. I see that day coming.
I see. Why Wakanda Analytica? It's very similar to
Cambridge Analytica.
Are you trying to overthrow the American election?
No, but I wanted to bring the idea that this place could be a center of deep thought and thinking about things in important ways, in new ways, whether using big data or what have you, intellectual property, you name all the different technologies I'm involved with. So it was just that general feeling of, can we apply intelligence to the situations here to solve problems? And I think that's what motivated it.
I see. And 15 years in Uganda, 15 years. Have you started a family here? 15 years, that's a child in S3. That's I'm trying to understand why the whole 15 years.
Well, so the first 5 years was back and forth. And then since 2012, I've been here nonstop, but more or less. I mean, a week here, a week there, go to Zambia, or Rwanda, or Kenya, or Israel. Why I haven't had children yet? Is that the question?
Why stay in Uganda for 15 years? That was
well, because it's a challenge. It's like do you know the American astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yes.
Somebody asked him, why did you become an astrophysicist? And his answer was, well, it's the same reason I became a wrestler, because it's hard. Part of living is to challenge yourself. True. And even if you're not very good at it at first, you can improve, right? You only have yourself to compete against. And so, very smart, ambitious people look for challenges. And it's a challenge for me. I've had my share of successes and failures here. And it's a very different culture from where I'm from. And I tell everybody, I had my mission statement when I moved here. I based on Star Trek, Captain Sisko, the black captain from Deep Space Nine, and the very first episode, he's declaring his mission, and his mission is to coexist and learn. And
I see.
So
wow.
That's my mission. That's my mission. And everybody's always surprised, and my friends back in the U.S. and Canada, I frequently hear their criticisms of things going on here, and I'm like, things are more complex than you realize.
That's true.
And you probably should listen more than talk. and and we have 2 ears, 1 mouth.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, that's also, there's a Uganda saying about, 2 ears and
so and this is it's an interesting place, and it's youthful. It's the youngest country on earth, and Africans are going to be half of humanity by the end of the century, right? At the rate of growth we have now.
Yeah, true.
So half of all human beings on earth will be African. So I think that's important. I don't know what it means, but it still seems important. And so why do I, and I see a lot of opportunities to improve things. There's lots of room for improvement. A country like Canada, it's so hard to see how you can make it better. Versus here, there's so many ways it can be made better. And some of it's just drawing from lessons that we already learned in the US or Canada or anywhere else. And like I was able to fix some problems for hospitals by applying a labeling technology that I used in the 1990s at Stanford Hospital to solve some of our problems of samples getting mislabeled or lost and not being able to redo an experiment. So it turned out we had a lot of problems at the hospitals here in Uganda of getting results for HIV or TB or whatever, where false positives, false negatives, and then you go back to retest the same sample and you can't find it because the label fell off or the writing got smeared. And I remember I read an article in the Monitor about this. This is like 2014, and I was horrified to hear that they couldn't repeat the results. I'm like, oh shit, they're giving people potentially life-changing diagnoses of having a deadly illness and perhaps leading to them losing their marriage, their job, their housing. These are not small issues, and you would want to be able to double check, triple check, and make sure, right? And if you can't find the same sample, and I knew we had made the same mistakes at Stanford Hospital, and I had to bring in special labeling technology to get Stanford right. And so I just did the same thing here.
I see.
So it's kind of cool. I can draw from my past and figure out ways to fix problems.
And I see. That's most. And the reason I asked actually because I sort of presumed a few of the friends I have from America who choose to stay. I think 2 of them, they stay because of a woman. So I assumed you're going to tell us this Telemundo story of being in Uganda.
Oh, about women?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I had I don't want to talk about my personal life much,
that's
but I had a long time Ugandan girlfriend, and we still care about each other, but we've gone in separate ways.
I see.
And the lockdown kind of forced us to face up to that. It was painful for both of us. But I don't let myself get distracted by just chasing women. I think that's a real way to ruin your life.
Yeah, true.
I watch a lot of young men squander their best years chasing women when they need to build themselves. They need to love themselves instead of looking for someone to love them. And so that's I'm often having to give young men advice like that. And it's and I do see the Mzungu who are just kind of, I don't know. I don't think it's the right way to behave. I mean, that's not to say I don't mind a beautiful woman. I love them, but it's just I'm not going to let that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. What's the show? I used to watch a lot of that sitcom, Big Bang Theory.
Oh yeah.
That sort of your story.
All those geeky guys, with comic books.
Yeah, well, not geeky, but this guy who goes to university at. Is it?
Like Sheldon.
Sheldon,
yeah. So
but
part of me that's like,
exactly. Yeah. So when you say 15, I was like, wow, it's like genius, stuff.
So and I try hard not to be that arrogant, but
no, it's a character. Like so, most of the. Okay, so for that show, most of people criticize the character, but I mean I think the writers are intending for humor.
It's an exaggeration.
Yeah, exactly. There's no.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. There are times I have felt that way in my life. I mean, when I was younger, I was usually smarter than my teachers, and that certainly didn't make things go well.
I see.
Because adults get very scared when a young person's smarter than them.
Yeah.
And I also learned that people in general are scared of smart people.
That's true.
And so I had to learn to kind of not rub it in everyone's face.
Yeah, no. To wrap off, I wanted to ask one question. You seem like ambitious. Yeah, you've achieved quite a lot, but it seems like that hasn't derailed the ambition. What?
Well,
You wouldn't say that, right?
Well, I don't know. I feel like I was. This is a much less aggressive version of Joel than used to exist.
Okay. Oh, really? Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, yeah. So from what you're saying, yeah, but still, like the ambition is still there. You're moving into a new country, or things
Sure,
like that.
and
Yeah,
I'm not a
yeah.
young guy. I'm 57 years
Yeah,
old, and
yeah,
I've
yeah,
managed to
exactly.
keep myself looking pretty young.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No.
And my family lives long. That's
Yeah,
the other
true,
thing.
true.
I'm the
Right.
line
Not that
of
you're
David
lucky.
and Solomon, right? So
see.
we tend to be long-lived. My mother's just turned 90, and she's going strong. She still works.
Oh wow.
So,
wow. Yeah.
Anyway, that doesn't mean I can't get hit by a Buddha and get killed tomorrow.
I see. Yeah. Oh yeah. First, actually, you were saying that story. The question I wanted to ask, you'll answer that after you tell us about that story. The question I wanted to ask was the legacy. Like what is going to be? What do you think? At what point would you say, okay, now that I've done this, I'm ready to die, or I'm ready to retire and can't eat mangoes, whatever. What is that one thing you think is the?
Well, I mean, I gave away the human genome already, right? I did that when I was 36, right? I made it available I didn't file patents, right? That's how we beat everybody on the planet with Chiruluta as our chief engineer, right?
Yeah.
So we did not file patents, and yet we beat every company in every country on planet Earth. We could have owned your DNA, everybody's DNA. I could have owned it. And instead, I decided that was unethical. And I decided I would not file patents on the human genome. So I kind of felt like I already have done something of such profundity that if I died tomorrow, I could still feel like I made a really huge impact.
That makes sense.
So I don't know. I think this whole philosophy, I don't know if it's just America that's promoted it, or if it's how many countries it's existed in, this idea of retiring and sitting around, which is kind of borderline death. And there's this philosophical attitude of wanting to have a stress-free life, which again sounds like death to me, because if you're living and you're trying to improve yourself or your family or anything, you're going to have stress. I mean, there's unhealthy levels and there's tolerable levels.
Yeah.
But a stress-free existence is non-existence. So I don't know if I believe that the premise even makes any sense.
No, I agree.
I believe in lifelong learning. I think the folks that stop learning after university are cheating themselves. The people who are convinced that whatever they know is still true are also cheating themselves, because part of learning is unlearning. We're always unlearning something we thought was true, and we discover that it only looked like it was true from one perspective. You look at it from another perspective, and it's not quite true. And I'm doing a lot of that here every day, so I get to do a lot of unlearning, which is fun. I enjoy discovering that I misunderstood something. For me, that's a moment to celebrate. Every time I learn that I misunderstood something. Sometimes very painful and disappointing often. But I know it's important to unlearn, because you can't learn unless you unlearn. And I just think people have to keep on doing that.
Yeah.
Why would you stop just because you have enough money, or I don't know. I just believe that that's what we are. I think that's what humans are. At heart, we are explorers. We explore our lives day by day. We explore the galaxy to try to, discover beyond the boundaries of our current knowledge. And the more we learn, the more we discover how ignorant we are. Yeah. And I think any real scientist should not be preaching as if they're giving you gospel truth. Instead, they should be helping you discover better questions, because I think that's really one of the good purposes of life, is to figure out what are better, wiser questions. We often waste our time on questions that aren't very helpful.
I see. Yeah. Joel, thank you very much for accepting our invite.
Well, I'm honored to be here.
This has been very enlightening for me, but has been also extremely interesting. I've enjoyed having this conversation with you.
It seems like I've surprised you several times.
I think that's the beauty of the thing is, people say most people claim not to judge, but everyone, like, you judge, but there is a beauty in being surprised by having this assumption of someone, and then realizing that, oh wow, this actually, there's a different thing about it.
So what about me surprised you? Now let me ask you the question.
Well, the thing of the whole genius thing. So when I was at university or before that, I used to be, I don't know, I would say maybe insecure about my own intelligence. So I used.
But you're a brilliant man.
I used to obsess, exactly. So as I'm saying, I used to obsess a lot about sounding intelligent. I would read or listen to people who I thought, that's how I started reading Steven Pinker's work. Blah, blah, blah. I wanted to sound intelligent and sound like I know things, right? But again, I grew out of it. At this point, I feel like I know exactly not exactly, but have like an idea of how I want to mold my life. But yeah, again, this is what you reminded me of. Joining university at 15 and all of this stuff you've done, and you're still extremely humble, right? Like extremely humble. If I did half of the DNA thing you did, there will be a billboard in Kampala with my face. This is the guy who did it. Well, that's a joke, but I don't think I would. I'd keep my humility like that, right? That's what I would.
Well, what am I gonna do? Until COVID came, almost nobody knew any of the things that I had done. If I had brought up PCR 3 years ago, it would have been just what?
Yeah.
If I had brought up RNA, that I made the first synthetic RNA at Stanford in 1991, you wouldn't have known what RNA was.
Like, what is RNA?
And you would PCR.
I see.
You would have thought of.
Yeah.
And even in America or Canada, very few people know about it among the average population until now. So it just wasn't. And on top of that, my family is very, they grew up in the Great Depression, but my mother and father. And they grew up valuing hard work and the working class. And my mother used to joke about all of her degrees. And she would say, BA, can I use profanity here, or is it going to piss people off?
No, you can.
Okay, she said, BA stands for bare ass. And she said, BS stands for bullshit. MS stands for more shit. And PhD stands for piled higher and deeper. So the whole purpose of your education is to learn more and more about less and less, and to know absolutely everything about nothing at all. And so I grew up with that as the mantra, and my parents telling me the lowest person in a society may be smarter than the person with the best degree. So never underestimate someone and never overestimate someone. And I went to school with a lot of people who were from, I went to Harvard and Stanford, right? These are supposed to be smart people.
Yeah, exactly.
Many of them are. Not all of them, though. And they lack common sense. And we've just seen a whole global hysteria by a bunch of people with degrees running amok, spreading fear and panic, and locking down able-bodied young people who had a much higher chance of getting killed in a road accident than getting killed from COVID. And we don't lock down the planet for suicide or road accidents or drownings, and all of those, at least here, are bigger killers than COVID.
Exactly. Here we don't lock down the country for malaria.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Uganda had a great opportunity to not have to do the same horrible stuff to itself that every other country did. And I've been outspoken about this from the beginning against my people. I've criticized the Israelis from the beginning. I know why they did it.
Oh yeah, but the thing I liked about Israel was the transparency.
Yes.
The fact that they published the data.
You can't be anything but transparent in Israel. I mean, we punish corrupt people hard. Look at Netanyahu. His wife's big crime was ordering takeout and bringing food into their building, I think over whatever 12 years they were in power, she brought in $30,000 of catered food. That was her horrible crime. I think most countries of the world would be grateful if that was the biggest crime anybody committed. So the transparency of it also was the Israelis overreacted because of their fear of losing their grandparents who had survived the Nazi Holocaust.
Of course.
So they felt this intense guilt that they had to protect these people who had survived the Nazis. And so they overreacted, and then, in a lot of places did, not for that same reason. But you could argue generally, we saw globally the elders eating the young.
Yeah. What about the argument of sort of the industrial pharma, military industrial pharma complex, the fact that people are out to make money selling vaccines rather than...
Well, the pharma industry is based on disease, right? So, the less well you take care of yourself, the more likely you're going to be their customer. So the more Coca-Cola you drink, the more Pfizer you need. So that's the reality. I think our lifestyles, what we eat, exercise, all that. If you look at the top comorbidities, the cofactors that determined who would die or end up in the ICU, it's all lifestyle, no matter what age. Right? It was the top cause of death was obesity. And after obesity was anxiety. And then came diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And all of those things are from people not exercising, eating too much junk food, and eating, just overeating. And these are things, so that was the greatest thing. I mean, I'm sure many people have criticisms, but the thing that was uniquely wonderful what President Museveni did was, and I've talked about it in my videos, is he exercised on national television. I'm not aware of any other leader in the world that did something so practical and the one right thing that should have been done. We should have just gotten the whole world into training camp. All right, you're fat, go to fat camp. All right, you have PTSD from living through a war or being abused, you need therapy. All right, exercise will help everything. Exercise helps with depression and anxiety. So let's get everybody eating right, drinking water, exercising, getting out in the sunshine, strengthen the vulnerable. That to me should have been the primary policy perspective. Strengthen the vulnerable, isolate them if you can, to avoid them being vulnerable to other people, and let all the able-bodied people whose bodies are very likely to fight off the infection without massive damage, let them go about their lives. And I think that's what they learned in past pandemics. Again, we come to my theory of history being generational, a 70 or 80 year cycle. The people who lived through the prior horror eventually retire and die. And you're left with the people who never knew what it was like to live with the prior horror. And so they make huge mistakes because they don't learn from the lessons of history, or they take the wrong lessons. And so I think we had that worldwide where the baby boomers and Gen Xers in the rich world were suddenly empowered because the generations before had retired and died. And these guys had never had to face a real crisis. And they overreacted. And in trying to prevent one type of catastrophe, they've caused others. I think half of the world now is suffering from mental illness. And so many young people have very traumatized, low self-esteem. We've been beating up these children for decades, telling them that the whole world's coming to an end from climate change. And now we've told these kids that, look, you're just a disease spreader. I mean, what kind of a horrible thing to tell children. And then, look, I remember when I first moved to Japan to study there, and there they wear masks when they're sick. And it freaked me out, and I was 21 years old, and I was watching people in flu season wearing masks. The fact I couldn't see people's faces freaked me out. And it's like, I can't imagine what that does to child's brain development when you're looking at everybody with a mask on. And then you're forced to wear a mask, and then now I hear kids don't even want to take them off. So it's like we've really scared them. And I don't think, when I've had many arguments with people in ministries of health around the world, I go, you're only looking at the ICU. You're not looking at the whole picture.
True.
The media has given us this periscope.
Look
at this one thing, and that helps to keep people scared, and that's what sells media. Fear, right? Sex and fear, sex and death, you can say, are what sell. And the greatest way to get people scared is to narrow their vision. I mean, look how. I mean, it's this is even more controversial, but I think. What happened in America with the BLM-related riots, they really terrified black people and made them feel like there were just whites running around hunting them down. And it's like, I remember when it was like that. And it's like, things have come far. I remember when I had a black girlfriend at Stanford, and both of us got harassed horribly at university, in our hometowns. It's just, and now the latest survey, 94% of Americans want to intermarry. So across race. So I mean, this idea that the country's filled with racists, it's like, what, we only have 6% that don't want to intermarry? That's a pretty small percentage of racists that we have to worry about, to be honest. And by periscoping our vision on the few examples of evil. Ones. I mean, I was one of the founders of Cop Watch in Oakland. And so me and my best friend. We went around with video cameras trying to catch the police in the middle of beating somebody so we could try to bring justice. Mm-hmm. So I was doing this in the 1980s. I remember when all you had to do was go to a KFC and you stay there long enough and you'd watch something horrible happen. And, now it's a different situation. And I know a lot of guys my age are still living in the past. And even though some of them are multimillionaires living in mansions in the hills, and they haven't lived in a rough neighborhood ever, maybe, or certainly not for the last 30, 40 years, and they feel guilty about it. So it's just like there's guilty white liberals, there's guilty black liberals, and they wanted to imagine that just, I asked them, look, has there been a single black millionaire killed by the police in America? Has there been a single black doctor, an accountant, a lawyer? No, the people getting killed are in very dangerous areas, and it doesn't matter their color. Whites in dangerous areas get killed by the police, and Latinos in dangerous areas. I mean, it's just, they're just dangerous places. I lived in them. I lived in Oakland.
Although, so one of the biggest sort of counter-arguments, especially by the BLM movement, is the numbers in prison, right?
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, exactly. So
no, well, there's layers to that. I mean, you point out Trump. I mean, I think Trump rightly identified one of the key problems, which is having low-skilled American workers who have to pay high rents and high everything else are competing against low-paid workers in China and Mexico, and it's very unfair to the low-skilled workers. And so their jobs have been shipped overseas, and so the men don't have work. They don't get the respect from the women. They can't hold together their families. The children grow up without a father influence to help them, navigate the frustrations of life, which is inevitable. And when you're a teenager going through puberty and testosterone poisoning, you really need a wise father to help guide you so you don't screw up your life and commit suicide by cop or whatever, So a lot of it's the father crisis. And the father crisis comes from the job crisis. And, putting people who have to pay rich nation rents against people who pay poor nation rent, which can be 20-fold different. And that affects everything, not just the monthly rent you pay to where you lay your head, but your groceries and every other thing you buy is impacted by the rent. And so Trump hit on something important with that. And that's why I think it scared the establishment when they saw that like 20% of black men workers were supporting Trump in like Ohio and Pennsylvania. They're like, oh, Jesus, this isn't supposed to happen. We're trying to divide the workers against each other by race, get the whites and blacks to hate each other, and they're coming together. That's their nightmare scenario. That's always been their nightmare scenario, right? And often it is, you could say it's white privilege, but it was the privileged white workers that ended slavery. And they were the ones that, 750,000 of them died ending slavery. So, okay, they're white privilege, they used it to good advantage. So I think we need to get beyond just envy and resentment and realize that there's so much more we can do by working together. And the fact that everybody wants to intermarry is wonderful.
Exactly.
I mean, the country is, all my friends are intermarried. I mean, I don't think I have a single friend back in the US or Canada that's not married across race. So it's like, when I see the media depicting it as if it's some Ku Klux Klan,
but isn't that intentional? Because if you are not looking, if the black people, especially the poor black people, right, or the poor colored people, or generally the poor people, if you are not looking at these petty racial things,
they would unite and try to get
exactly. Yeah, and then they're looking at Bill Gates. They're like, yo.
So basically, this sounds very cynical. I may be exaggerating. It seems like wealthy, educated people, white and black, wanted a race war instead of a class war.
I agree with that.
That's tragic. Yeah. And I saw it in 1992 with the Rodney King riots, and which very sad. At that time, I was living in Oakland, so I wasn't in the heart of the fire, if you will. My girlfriend, though, her mother was living in LA, and she got her business and her home burned down in the riots. And she's black, right? So she used to be a former Black Panther. She was Nation of Islam, and she had to come live with us. And it was just so heartbreaking. And I had a personal connection, because what triggered that riot was the verdict of the jury in the Rodney King trial, which this is going to sound very strange, but I think you will understand what they were doing. They purposefully, I believe, moved the trial of these evil policemen to my hometown, which is famous for being a racist town at the time. And it's like a quarter of the people were connected to the Los Angeles Police Department. So the prosecution, who you would think would want to put the police behind bars, instead wanted them to be found innocent to trigger riots. And then the key lawyer involved in that became Secretary of State under Clinton. So I think it was a strategy to help get Clinton elected by, showing that we had all these race problems. And because why else, all the places in the state of California, to put it in my hometown at that time, where so many families were connected to the Los Angeles Police Department, you'd have to want the police to get exonerated. And why would the prosecution ever agree to such a thing? In fact, pushed for it. So at the time when it was happening, I was like, this is odd. This is very odd. It doesn't smell right. They're going to get the police off, and we can all see, we've been watching it every night for a year, how horrible this was and how unjust it was. And so they purposely wanted to whip us up into an emotional frenzy, let the police go innocent, and make people have less faith in the system, and therefore they could win their election.
If you look at right now, the way things are playing out, it seems it seems they're just getting the same script. And
it's the same script. It's like, when you've seen the trials in Minnesota and whatnot, they almost wanted the whoever that they're demonizing on the white side. They want them to end up being exonerated of their crimes, so they make the public angry. And it's a clever strategy. It's a very clever, counterintuitive strategy that the forces that you would expect to want to punish the bad behavior are trying to allow it to be out there, and because they know it will make everybody outraged. And it's brilliant. It's if it wasn't so sick and if it wasn't so immoral and horrible,
impressive.
You have to stand there in just awe of the genius of their evil. And I don't think very many people, because I was so up close to it, I saw through it very rapidly. And so I was trying to warn many of my friends in BLM, you guys are being played. This is a whole game that's being played on you by upper class whites and blacks. And you guys are just pawns in this game. Same with the Proud Boys, and they all were infiltrated by FBI and CIA. So it's all a fake battle. I think similar with the anti-vaxxers, and there's like creating fake battles.
I agree. You mentioned that you think the military runs the world. I think it's the intelligence, the national intelligence. Unless of course you consider them part of the military.
Well, the classic phrase now used is deep state.
Mm-hmm.
So the deep state is definitely broader than military. Yeah, telecommunications, energy, computation, many key sectors are part of that deep state. And then the bureaucracy, right? You have the elected representatives and then the permanent bureaucracy. And the permanent bureaucracy rarely changes.
That's
Even
true.
after a civil war, it often barely changes. So, and people think that the elections are what changes things, and sometimes they do, but it seems to me the bureaucracies are very powerful, and they're there permanently. Nobody fires them. So whatever's in place stays in place, and we have this outlet of elections that give us something short of civil war to do to try to give us a feeling of trying to make a change.
Yeah.
And there are limits to how much change can occur in any dimension, whether geopolitically or what have you. And they've been writing about this since the French Revolution, right? The French Revolution killed off many of the aristocrats and whatnot, but the same system remained.
Exactly.
And in fact, they had to bring back, even in the Soviet Union Revolution, they had to bring back so many of the same people to organize the state because the revolutionaries didn't know how to administer anything. They knew how to be critics, they knew how to burn things down, but they didn't know how to run anything. So,
I would say even in the fundamental change of 1986.
Well, as I said, I don't get involved in Ugandan politics.
True.
I don't feel I have a right to.
No, but this, this conversation is really, really, really interesting. I've enjoyed it very much.
Well, I can tell. I love your smile, and I'm glad I could surprise you.
I've enjoyed it very much.
What other violations of stereotypes should I commit here?
So the other thing. Okay, the other thing I'll tell you off air. I don't want people to say judge white people so much.
Everybody judges. It's okay. Stereotypes wouldn't exist unless they reflected some part of reality.
Okay. But the other thing I already told you, it's most of them who stay, they stay because of women.
Well, I did have a girlfriend. Is that the same time? I think you mean predatory.
Yeah, so that's...
no, that's not me. No, I'm not that type of person.
Yeah, but this is a good conversation. This I've enjoyed. This, I think, is worth publishing. When we started this, we imagined all conversations would be like this.
I'm happy to join you anytime you want.
Oh, true. Right. Definitely, if you're willing to come back, we'll schedule something else.
Why not? And I have a channel too. Joel the Time Traveler.
Absolutely.
And we only have 6 videos up so far. Ryonga works with me on it. We have a few more. We have a whole new series coming out on energy, which we'll be putting out in the next few weeks. And
like real energy or the spiritual stuff.
The joules and kilowatts and gigawatts and stuff like that. Yeah, but the spiritual question I want to touch on as well. I want to touch on the relationship between trust and energy requirements. And the less trust there is, the more energy you need.
Okay.
And we see that with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right?
I see. That's a good one.
Here, people don't trust each other, so they only are comfortable meeting in person, face to face. They can't do a deal over the phone, and so that means they have to drive somewhere, and that's using energy. And, And so, until recently, our roads were challenging. Now they're much better, but still. If you want to do a deal with somebody in Barada, you got to drive 5.5 hours each way. 4 if you're going fast. But you know what I'm saying, though. You have to exert a lot more energy when there isn't trust. And so when trust gets shattered, as we're watching happen in America, in Canada and Europe and many other places,
Yeah.
they're going to start
prices
having
are-
they're having an energy crisis.
Oh wow! So yeah, I'm going to start investing in energy now. So,
Well, the question is which type, and they're all in a race with each other, you know, and then there's the politics of it, and the geopolitics of it, and but so anyway, so that's on my channel. I like to talk.
yeah, no, definitely. I watched again a few things to sort of prepare for this. And I'm going to keep watching.
I'm happy to join you anytime, any subject you want to grill me on.
No, definitely.
I don't like to get involved in.
True. Yeah, I also don't.
It's not my place.
Yeah, not true.
It's not my place.
I didn't intend to get involved. I just joking about the local politics.
No, I understand. And that's fair. I know the same foreigners that probably are predatorily chasing women are the same ones that want to meddle in other countries. So I don't believe in meddling.
I see.
I believe in coexisting and learning and trying to be a good neighbor. That's my goal.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot, Joel. Thanks a lot for coming to the podcast. We're definitely going to, I think the next one will even structure sort of a few topics. So we come and have a back and forth. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. This has been great. This has been really, really good. God, Yes, I'll take the blessing.
Well, actually, it's a Jewish blessing.
Oh,
from my line, right? I'm Levite, right, and Kohanim. So we are supposed to bless the congregation. And this is, you remember from Star Trek how Spock holds his fingers? Yeah. That's a Jewish thing.
Oh, wow.
Because Spock, Leonard Nimoy, he's my cousin, right? He's Jewish.
Yeah.
And so we are Kohanim, so we are the ones who have to bless everyone. Which I know is the opposite of how it works with the Kabaka, but I've learned that by accident. I didn't mean to insult anyone. I just figured, let me do what I'm supposed to do, which is blessing people. So it turned out that people here generally they bless the king, which is fine too.
I see. Yeah. Well, wow, that's also okay. Back in 15 years, I think. When I was watching the videos, I spent 4 years of my O level in Ginger, and that's how I got a chance to learn. That's how I got a chance to learn Lusoga. Otherwise, I would be speaking 1-2 languages my life. So I'm very impressed usually when I notice someone, because I've tried to learn other languages. I've tried, to be honest. But when I notice someone where it comes naturally, like that guy I was telling you about, I'll send you probably a link to his stuff. It's so impressive. And the fact that some people are not aware that is actually a hard thing to do. It's like learning a new language is something extremely hard. I find that extremely impressive, yeah.
Well, for me, it's just, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. It's I was always told when you go to another country, you should be learning their culture, and my parents had me even learning to eat with chopsticks at the age of 3, so I could go anywhere in Asia. So for me, I had a factory in Jinja, and Bulungi Bwanzi Energy. We made briquettes out of crop waste, and workers in our factory came from all over the East.
So that's you could fix. Yeah, wow.